this is what we wish interpreters knew. Okay? Many times, my experience has been when we go to interpreter trainings and workshops, we teach interpreters the proper way to do things. And we see deaf people will come up and say, I wish interpreters would do this. And then what happens? There's a line of interpreters standing there ready to explain the reason why we must do this. But I always say, why don't we just listen to the deaf person and figure out how we can do this together, all right? Interpreters have their rules. Okay, fine. Deaf people wish. So it's not our time to teach deaf people. It's time for the deaf people to teach us. Okay? So let's just sit back and listen. These men have agreed to give their opinions, and then if there's time left at the end, we can maybe ask some questions and all that. Okay? Your chair. So we have Billy Level. We have Carl Moore, and we have Mark Lowenstein here. So, first question. She wanted my keys. I gave them to her. So the first question is, do you like to meet with the interpreter before speaking? And if so, what do you want to talk about? What's that conversation like? So you can go that way, however you want to do it.
Billy, start.
Shuffle over. Which one do you want?
This
Okay.
Okay, for myself, I don't really think about it, but it's just kind of something that comes natural to me. Go ahead and talk with that person, the interpreter. I've never met that interpreter before. I'll ask them, what's your name? Where are you from? And just different things like that. It's natural just to kind of sit there and talk for a second. If I really know the interpreter, a lot of times I do that in my work with the deaf. Almost kind of like a social worker. I'll bring them along with me. So when they arrive there, the interpreter, if they know me, they say yes, and I'm happy because I'm easy to interpret for. And make it where everyone can understand. But sometimes, a new interpreter, and this happened to me recently, and we told each other our names, and I told them I'm a preacher and everything. But okay, I'll try to step back and if they don't understand, then I'll step in. And, it kind of depends on the interpreter and their skill level. Recently, if they're not fully qualified, then they need a little bit of help. I can step in and help them a little bit. That's what I have to say about that.
Not too long ago, a friend of mine who works at Gallaudet University and lives in Kansas. His deaf preacher contacted me. I live in Oklahoma right now, half for the last 8 years. But this preacher in Kansas contacted me and said, Carl, can you come to a memorial service? Or what, why you need me? And he informed me that your best friend's speaks very highly of you. And I thought it would be nice to invite you to come and talk with the family. And, you know, your friends and what? And I didn't even know that he'd been in Kansas. And I didn't know he'd passed away. And I was very sad to hear that. But they asked me to come and lead the memorial service. Just speak briefly about him. And I was crushed, heartbroken. And I asked the preacher, how did he die? Oh, it was a man thing, you know. It was a certain type of cancer. But I, of course, was glad to go. And just thought, wow, this is the death of my friend. So as I was driving there and thinking and praying, I got there and I saw the family, friends and relatives, schoolmates, all at the church for death there. The deaf preacher came up to me and said, here's this paper for you. That's great. I looked it over and continued planning out what I was going to say at the funeral of my best friend. We lived far apart and just hadn't kept up with each other. So I prayed fervently for God to help me know what to say. And when I stood before the family, I was relieved because I had been approached by the interpreter. And the interpreter said, come here, I need to talk with you one-on-one. I agreed, and I was so impressed with that interpreter's initiative. The interpreter said, I'm a nationally certified interpreter, but you may not know me, and I just want to prepare myself and become acquainted with you and know what you're planning to say, basically. And so I shared the paper with the interpreter, and I warned the interpreter that I will have a few of my own words about my friend. So as I stood before the group, I gave my talk, and what helped me was being able to look at the picture, because it was a memorial service. So there was a picture of my best friend who passed away. And I shared with the family the good memories and experiences of relationship that we had during our time. And after he had left, and I left for a better job, and how much I wished to be like him, and some things. But I left Gallaudet. I didn't stay, and I didn't realize that he was so close by, that we were living in Kansas and Oklahoma. I mean, I've been there 8 years. He's been in Kansas for over 10 years. But we were so close by and didn't even know it. My friend. I mean, he passed away. And we never know when we're going to die. But I was so thankful to the interpreter who approached me, and I thought that was a very good example. It helped me to present the information to the family. Some people knew signs, some people did not know signs. In my home church, we wouldn't need an interpreter from outside, because I have interpreters with me every time that we have something, interpreters that I trust. Oh, Mark. It's a very interesting story. I have a friend on Facebook. We're not friends, but we're on Facebook. He's a deaf guy with a hearing wife who is an interpreter, and they got a divorce, right? So the deaf guy sees a lot of interpreters in the Arizona area, and was seeing that people were asking, what do you think about a specific interpreter? And they would have conversations about different interpreters. And maybe not using names, but using enough information that you knew who they were talking about. And I didn't want to get involved in that conversation, you know, this interpreter, good, bad, whatever. Because deaf people will talk amongst themselves, and they talk about interpreters and how they do their work. And, you know, they'll talk about those doctors' offices and job interviews and the variety of settings interpreters go to at school. A doctor's office, though, is primarily where you hear the complaints of interpreters. So this guy, friends on Facebook, he created a Facebook page. What's the name of it? Oh, come on. Deaf Interpreters Grade, right? Deaf Interpreters Grade. So where you can grade an interpreter, they can get an F, a C, a D, a B, an A. And you tell your blog, you tell why. And it's very direct. It's very, right there. And you know, it says, hey, we're just trying to improve the quality of interpreting agencies. But, you know, he's not certified. He's not licensed to be evaluating. His wife was. But it's very interesting to me that a lot of deaf people will post comments and give information, and then he will prepare a blog, and he will share comments. Oh, this happened here. This happened at this doctor's office. This job interview, something happened. And interpreters, when they say it, interpreters have stepped over the line and taken over. That perhaps the interpreter says more than the deaf person did. The deaf person said, hey, I just spoke for an instant. Why are you still talking? Why is your mouth still moving? And they would become upset over minor things. You know, maybe when you sign something in ASL, it takes 2 handshakes, but it takes a lot more words. Or maybe the interpreter's trying to make them sound pretty good, you know. There are a variety of reasons for that. But there is a system out there of grading interpreters, and it's out there on Facebook. And I will tell you, Facebook can be good, but Facebook can be dangerous because, you know, once a message is put out there, your reputation's on the line. Thank you. The next question. No. While you're speaking, do you tend to monitor the interpreter, or do you just speak and trust the interpreter? And if you monitor the interpreter, how do you do that? What are you looking for? Me?
Okay, I'll start. Sometimes I do look over and try to read the lips. You know, I'm looking both at their signing and their lip reading at the same time. Sometimes the interpreter's talking and I'm looking, are they saying the same thing I'm saying? So I catch some of it. You know, I may not catch every word, but I do catch enough. And I go, okay, yeah, that's right. I can catch enough. And occasionally they go, that's wrong. No, I'm sorry. I meant this, so that way the interpreter can correct it and make sure that my message is coming across. That's what I do.
Last year, I think it has been a year ago, I spoke before the town council. It was a city council meeting, and we were discussing in the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is a good city. And I brought, you know, this map and asked one of my church volunteer deaf women to volunteer to mark places on the map using yellow to identify the 115 members within the ministries of the 130 deaf within our ministry that lives in the city. So we identified their addresses, and at that time were probably 15 or more addresses of people who lived outside the city. But I was identifying this to the city council, and this map showing the addresses of deaf people in yellow and saying this is where our deaf and hard of hearing members live within our program, and drew a quadrant to show the city council how many live. We have about 30 in Northwest, about 20 in Southwest, and maybe 15 Northeast area, and then however many, 3 in the Southeast area. And also had identified where the church building was located, and the 115 members, and how they use public transportation. But unfortunately, the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, never provides public transportation on Sundays. They never have. And it's a very unfortunate situation, very sad. So our church was nice enough to, within our deaf ministry, to purchase a used church bus to go around and pick up people. And we also encourage our deaf members to come in by car or to carpool. I approached the city council and said, why would you want to change the bus schedule? Why would you want to cut bus services when you've already cut the budget by 30%? And we brought 3 interpreters, 1 for a deaf-blind person, 1 for the deaf people in the audience. We had 30 deaf in the audience who came to support. And then we had our best interpreter to voice for me. I had 6 pages of presentation. They only gave me 2 minutes to speak, though. So I had to try to compress it, and each page got cut down and I had to go really fast. And 40 people signed the sign-in sheet to be able to speak to the subject. And what surprised me was our preacher's wife was also there to sign to speak, but the council cut it off, and they only allowed 10 speakers. I happened to be number 10 out of the 40 people who had signed up wanting to discuss this topic. I was very impressed with the woman who was number 9 who spoke, and she mentioned the Seattle, Washington. At about the same size population and the same financial budget, there were a lot of similarities, but their public transportation system was so much more superior to ours, and they weren't cutting back. So the issue was not with the people, it was with the management, and that really impressed me. So it's a good thing that I was able to change and tweak my plan of what I was going to say. So, and I asked the city council, how do you know how many of these people that are riding the bus are not deaf or hearing? They're going to be impacted. Leave this alone. And lift everybody up. Have buses for handicapped people. But anyway, I had my top interpreter who I trusted, so I was just flying through my prepared notes. And I had a copy for the city council. I had a PowerPoint for people to see. So I finished in 2 minutes, and I walked away, and all the people were very pleased with what I had to say. So I prayed, and I asked the city council, I said, ask God for wisdom and use other cities as a model for public transportation on Sundays, because God gives us everything. Why are you taking away from us, from the people? So I left, and the preacher's wife gave me a hug and shared the news with our congregation about how well I represented our deaf ministry. At the same time, I told the city council, I don't represent all the entire deaf community. I just represent the deaf ministry within the church. And let them do more, because we're all taxpayers and all that. So I think things are getting a little better, but there's still no public transportation on Sundays, and that is one thing that disappoints me right now. Mark says, you asked if I monitor the interpreter, right, while I'm preaching or at any time. I do. For example, I have a heart problem. And I use some medications that have some really big words, big names, right? So every time I say mestacapalapalapal, and I'll have to slow down and say mestatropoliol. Got it? Because I cannot look at the doctor, and I have to look at the interpreter too. I have to slow down. I'm not looking at the doctor at that point. I'm looking at the interpreter because the interpreter gets stuck and do what? So I say mestatropoliol. That's what I say, metatropoliol. LOL, like, LOL, and then, But I do look back and forth between the interpreter and the person that I'm speaking to. Now, when I'm preaching, we often hire an interpreter. We do not have a personal interpreter in our congregation. We don't have one. We've been looking for one and praying for one. We had someone come that we were training who was doing really well, but just felt her confidence level wasn't there. She felt she needed more time. So we typically hire freelance interpreters. So when I'm preaching, say, and I put out the word baptism, I look at the interpreter to make sure they're not saying saved in your heart. Saved, he has been saved. Well, no. I said baptized, baptism. And the interpreter won't use the word baptism. The interpreter uses the word saved. And I'll say, no. I want you to use the word baptism. So there are times when you have key thoughts, key concepts that I do monitor the interpreter and try to read their lips and see that they're doing well. If I'm telling a story or what have you, I'm not going to worry about the interpreter. I trust them. But when it comes to serious issues, the steps of salvation, I really want to make sure the interpreter is following accurately. I would like to add what he had said about monitoring the interpreter. I don't. Some of you may know that I have an assistant named Zeth Pankhurst. He will voice interpret almost every word that I say. He talks really fast because he's prepared himself well every Sunday for my lesson. So I don't even bother. I trust him. I agree with Mark.
I agree with Mark. I look at those key words to absolutely make sure that those are being interpreted correctly.
Okay. Now, the fun one. Please share some things you wish interpreters would not do, but you've seen us do. Go ahead and tell us our bad habits. I've got some. I had a very important meeting with the head preacher and with an elder. They hired a professional interpreter from an interpreting agency, which impressed me. Good deal. Came in, relaxed, ready to go. And the interpreter, female, started doing this. And I said, what? And she was way too friendly. And in the back of my head, I was thinking, this interpreter, what I'm thinking of, and what I've heard in the community is that, help me with the A, what's that? Attitude? A mother attitude, a maternal attitude. Thank you. She had a mothering attitude, and I had to think, and keep cool and sit there, and the two men are there, and showing respect to the two men, but I found myself dealing with my issues about her. She interpreted well enough, but her behavior and her facial expressions, I just felt she needed to tone it down. She'd be like, she just was kind of like really over this, ooh, and some of the things she was doing, it did not match the way that men were talking, and I really wish that, and of course the hearing guys, they didn't know. They didn't know what she was doing. And so I was having this struggle internally, and I didn't think it was fun. She's a cool woman, but her attitude came through. And I guess I should have reported her to the agency when they send an interpreter for me to make sure that they don't send that particular one for me anymore from that agency. Because they keep track of that. The interpreters that I don't want to ever interpret for me. Truthfully, I didn't bother with it. But I hate to say that. But here you go.
For myself, a long time ago, I had an experience that was a little bit like yours, a little different. I wanted to submit a request to the elders, and they had an interpreter there. It wasn't my idea. The interpreter didn't like my idea. That interpreter, you could see her facial expressions. Okay. I know that interpreter was trying to influence the elders to turn down my request. I did not like that.
I used to work for Sorensen Communications as a trainer and installer. And it was my responsibility to observe interpreters throughout the VRS system. So I would make calls and observe interpreters, their facial expressions, their attitude, their responses, and how well they were voicing, and if they were enthusiastic. And then I would have to note their number, their interpreter number, because that's how they introduce themselves. Hello, this is interpreter number. And so I had to just write it down, and so they didn't realize who I was or what I was doing. And then at the end of the call, if things went well, then there was something to it. But if there was something that I noticed, I would report to the interpreter agency there at the Sorensen Center in Utah, who would then, make an effort to fix that. And there were a few things that I noticed amongst interpreters. And the one thing that really caught my eye is interpreters tend to take over. And made me feel like as if I didn't know what I was doing. And if I didn't know what I was saying. Because, am I not explaining myself clearly? The interpreter would go, blah, 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 they mean blah, 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 blah. They're like, hello, I didn't say that. Just interpret. Say what I say. Do not ad-lib or say what he means is this. Don't use your expansion techniques. Just say what I say. And that, also don't do a lot of deletions as well. But some of the deletions are minor, and particularly when it comes to oppression. I think I really hate to see oppression, and you have to be very careful because some deaf people are highly sensitive and will totally lose their cool if they feel the interpreter is oppressing them. Like that deaf interpreter, right? He's just furious with interpreters, and he keeps up with that. So you can get to the extreme. So, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what does a great interpreter do? What's the picture of a great? Smile. Say hello, good morning, how are you? Are you ready for your call? What's the BP thing? That's how they teach you. That's right.
Yes. I can feel like I trust that interpreter. Someone I can feel like I can trust as an interpreter.
I know some great interpreters. And what they do is, like you were saying on video relay, I had interviewed someone 4 times from New York. They contacted me, and so we had an interview with this person, and I'm thinking about having to give back, and they're saying, no, it's free, 9.5 minutes. So anyway, I asked for the questions in advance. So I got questions in advance. So I'm having this video interview, and the person is interviewing me from radio station, and And they couldn't figure out if Carl Moore was a man because they were hearing the interpreter's voice, a female voice. And I said, okay, explain to them that we're going through an interpreter and that this is really a guy. And so, oh, okay, so they got the idea of Carl Moore is a man using an interpreter. We're talking on the telephone, and the interpreter is a female. Okay, that's a hard thing for them to grasp. And then referred me to the anchor department for a radio interview, for a 9-minute radio interview. So then we had to have that conversation, and they called me for a live interview, and I answered their questions, and we were good to go because they had emailed those questions, and I was able to be prepared, and that was fine. I didn't realize that the top executive had listened to the interview and called me back and asked me if I would repeat that interview. And I said, if you pay me, if you're using me, you can pay me. And he laughed. You're funny, Carl. But don't forget, it's just 8 minutes. $3,000 of our time. So I think we're giving you $3,000 worth of publicity. Can we call it equal? And I said, yes, we can. And he said, I like you. We will use you again. And sure enough, I said it 4 times I had that radio interview. The question was, is it signing or voicing? Sometimes when people are voicing for an interpreter, they say monotone. And they just say the words. And that becomes very difficult to listen to. It's very monotonous, and the things drag on. Sometimes an elder will come to me and say, wow, that interpreter is so good. So I ask, what do you mean that interpreter was so good? Well, they had inflection, and they followed what you were doing, and it seemed to match. And, but keep in mind that sometimes you have to bring it down and be very serious, and be very quiet. And sometimes I'm like, come on, and I need the interpreter to match me and have the same affect that I do and have that inflection. It makes a difference, particularly in church, in the hearing. It's very interesting because I'm giving it stuff, but the interpreting needs to match my inflection as well. And an interpreter will do great if they can keep up with the affect and intent of the deaf person, and they can match that person and be prepared for that and not be boring monotone. And if they're monotone, maybe they don't enjoy their work, and this is just a boring duty for them. And they're like, here, your turn, pay me my 2-hour minimum. And, I want someone who's enthusiastic and has passion for their work and wants to provide the best service for the deaf person and the hearing, whether they're male or female. How are we on time? Do we have time for questions? Well, we have 4 minutes. We have time.
This is the last class.
We can go till 5, till 6. Do we have any, Billy?
I remember, this is not my personal experience, but I saw on Facebook a post. There's a video uploaded and had different types of interpreters. And same kind of things. Oh, and different interpreters interpret the same thing. Different ways, you have the deaf person doing the same thing, and then you have an interpreter like a rapper. Many times they'll use 4-letter words throughout everything. And you can notice the expressions on the different interpreters. Some of them, they have no problem with it. Some, oh. Some interpreters just aren't comfortable. Maybe they'll spell it out or something, or you can see it on their facial expression that you can go, they're like, that can be rough for interpreters. But the interpreters have to follow what the deaf person's saying.
I would like to share an experience with you. There was a new deaf preacher at my church, and our ministry is next door to a Hispanic ministry as well. And so we have him, whose primary language is Spanish, and second language is English. So we met, and we were talking and gesturing. He wanted to tell me more, and I decided, come to the office, that we needed to do that, and stood in the doorway. He gave me his cell phone number. I told him to stand in the doorway. So I went to my video phone. I punched in his phone number and asked for a Spanish trilingual interpreter, Spanish-speaking interpreter. They replaced, got this man who could speak Spanish. And so I said, I need you to call this number. I want to talk to this guy, gave the name. So he watched my ASL, spoke Spanish, and then the Spanish guy was standing right there in the doorway near me. And he started feeling around, his phone started to ring, he answered his phone, and he started speaking in Spanish, like, and he didn't know what was going on. I said, hello there. Now you can talk to me in your language. And this interpreter can see me on the video phone. And he began talking and was amazed that Carl's sitting right there. We're going through this system. And, of course, the guy who's doing the Spanish and interpreting is watching me. He's on the TV on my desk. And I told him, stay back, because, it's their policy that if he walks into the room, they see him on camera, they have to disconnect the call. So he stood back and I asked, how are you? And he's looking straight at me, and he's got this puzzled expression on his face going, you talking to me? And he goes, I don't know sign language. But then the operator starts speaking in Spanish, and he hears it in his ear, and his facial expression changes. He's like, Carl, are you talking to me? But I see your hands moving, but I'm hearing Spanish, and it was just messing me up. But we had this conversation, and just on and on and on. I mean, we went back and forth, and we talked for an hour and a half. And then when we finished that conversation, I said, oh, you can come and join our church. To the interpreter. The interpreter said, I'm doing you a favor. I had disconnected the call. And then the Spanish preacher and I hugged each other. And he said, can we do that anytime? I said, no, not standing in the same room. It's a long story. You want to take questions? We'll give another 5 minutes. We're open for questions. Anybody have a question? Anybody have a question? Up here.
If you're sitting in a church worship time, what do you expect the interpreter not to do? If you're sitting and the speaker's hearing and the interpreter's able to do it. That happens.
Right, expect the interpreter not to do. I would expect the interpreter not to add words to what I'm saying. They need to follow what I am saying. Of course, when I'm speaking, I'm signing ASL, I'm not following English syntax exactly. So it's okay for the interpreter to change it to English with that syntax, but adding to what I'm saying, something I'm not saying, that gets me fired up.
In our deaf ministry, we have more than one interpreter. Sometimes deaf people aren't real pleased when they see interpreters talking without signing while deaf people are in the room. So it's something deaf people come to me. I say, you need to tell them. You do it yourselves. You've got the power. Don't tell me what you don't like. I'm not going to be the go-between for you guys, because it looks like it all comes from me, and so I try to encourage deaf people to advocate for themselves. I don't have anything. They got it. They said what they said. I don't want interpreters to feel limited, that they're being highly monitored. They're part of the family. And I don't want interpreters to feel isolated. And I'm just the interpreter, and I'm the go-between between hearing and deaf world. I want them to feel a part of the world, to build a bridge together with interpreters. And also, I would say that probably for the first 6 or 7 years, the interpreters at church would speak with me individually, because our church has more than 5 interpreters who've been working for a total of 30 years, for more than 30 years. And so sometimes you bring in a professional interpreter from the community, they would say, why didn't you use one of our regular interpreters instead of the professional interpreter? So, because you wanted somebody neutral, right? You need that sometimes. Yeah, but sometimes those interpreters object to that. And they think I'm showing favoritism. Well, but you want somebody neutral, right? But then it makes it a target, and I get pinned on it. And I'm always having to defend myself and say, many deaf people don't know their rights, but I know my rights. So please respect my rights. Yep. And they'll say, wow. I'll go, no. Be patient. I'm praying for everyone that we can work together and educate each other until it finally has happened where they've been accepting and been doing that. And allowing deaf people to take control of their service. Is our question over here? You can ask a question.
Okay. I have a question for you, just a simple question. Do you feel comfortable giving feedback for the interpreter when it's over? I know sometimes interpreters finish and say, everything okay? And, ask them a little bit of feedback. And it's just, some people will, like you said, some people want to complain. They want to complain. But sometimes you feel like truly no answer. They say, yeah. And then sometimes, so maybe you feel like, I'm not sure, was it really good and they need to leave, or was it good? Sometimes like, yes, good. So, I feel comfortable, but was it really? Do you feel comfortable when the interpreter approached you and said, have some feedback?
Yeah.
Just some feedback. A long time ago when Bob Anderson was interpreting for me, I was talking about churchianity. It's an easy word to spell, but the concept. And so Bob, he just had a hard time understanding what I was talking about. So Bob kind of made me look bad in front of the audience there.
Just because you were spelling it. And
That's because you're spelling churchianity and Christianity in the same sentence, and he wasn't able to catch it. Well, yeah, that's true. I gotta learn to make sure to be careful and make sure it's clear. Or PowerPoint helps too. PowerPoint, you can look at it and understand it, and but finger spelling, that can make it a little more confusing. Bob and I still laugh about that through the years.
I'll tell you the truth. I hope that here at the National Deaf Christian Workshop I hope we have evaluation forms, and I'm going to specifically discuss about was the workshop good, were the classes good, were the interpreters good, and fill out an evaluation form. I think we should have one so that everyone has the opportunity to complete that, so that will help planning for future National Deaf Christian workshops. I haven't seen an evaluation form, so it looks like there's not going to be one. We'll do that tomorrow? Okay. Okay. So we're going to be able to make some checks. And we don't know who the interpreters were. We might know. We've only found out a day later or a week later or something about that. But right now, I've heard from the auditorium class where Mike Helms gave a presentation. It was a wonderful presentation on ASL 101 and deaf culture. And I was speaking with a hearing guide who signed to me and said, wow, the interpreter was so focused and just so professional interpreting. And I said, really? Wonderful. And in my mind, I'm thinking, the interpreters here would appreciate hearing that. But it didn't come from me because I'm deaf. How do I know? He's the one who needs to fill out the evaluation form complimenting Frances' interpreting ability. I wouldn't know. But she's here, so I know she's a good one. And she's doing a good job because she told me. Two things. I know we've got to go. Billy mentioned interpreters making the preacher look bad. That happens. And sometimes after worship is over, someone will come up to me and say, hey, I got to let you know that interpreter did not do a good job. And I didn't realize it, which means the entire audience has a completely different picture. And they think I didn't preach a good lesson. So that makes me feel a little bit off-centered. And I've talked to the elders and said I've heard this feedback that the interpreter didn't voice accurately. So I want you to know that my lesson was better. I was signing it, but the interpreter wasn't keeping up or missing some concepts or what have you. And sometimes I do have a pet peeve, which is that's why I monitor. I want to have that bond, that rapport with the interpreter. Make sure that we're on the same page. Sometimes the interpreter will interrupt me over and over, will interrupt me, and that. I have no trust. At that point, I have no confidence in them. I can't go on because the interruptions are too numerous. And I can't develop that bond with the interpreter, and it throws me off my game. And then Ryan asked about feedback. Yes. You've got to provide feedback. Because with the FCC in particular, and I'm looking to see who all is FCC, who are familiar with those regulations, but there are used to be seven, Monica's right. We had interpreter trainers. They've moved, they've gone different places, and our number has come down. I think we have 4 or 5 now. And 2 of those trainers are top-notch. One is a respected interpreter trainer because of the feedback they give. They know misproductions of signs. They give people notes to go home and study and to work on. And, you signed this, then you meant that. And gives them direct feedback. And that does help you improve. You got to have feedback. All right, there we go. Thank you.